have you ever bought a traditional, kind of the common Anthurium that you get in the big box stores, in the supermarkets, and you struggled a bit to get it to grow happily or possibly even rebloom for you? If so, stick around with me and let me review one such Anthurium. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, this is another review in my more common houseplant series, essentially, or sub-series, if that makes sense. I do a whole series of reviews on all types of different houseplants. And a lot of people have actually recently said, okay, I'm trying to remember which one I did that was, the Pachira aquatica recently. I also did a review on the Epipremnum, I think it was the golden pothos, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll add the playlist at the top here with all the different reviews so you can go and have a look at it. Now, this, I would assume, is a video that's going to talk more to people that are either just starting off or they've maybe just got an Anthurium, they don't know much about plants. Welcome, pull up a chair, and let's talk about how you can keep your Anthurium happy. Now, for a lot of my usual audience that goes for the slightly more extreme types of plants, this is one that might refresh some people's memories, it might traumatize a few people, or it might be something that you want to see how I do things with this type of Anthurium. And let's talk about the type of Anthurium. It is this kind of more traditional, I think it's sometimes called Flamingo Anthurium, you know, the one with the colorful blooms, and we'll talk about why they're not technically the blooms. I'll give you the little spoiler. This long bit, that's the bloom. This is just a type of leaf that is adapted in order to kind of have a different color. And you can see a different bloom there. You can see some spent blooms here. But without further ado, let's dive into things. So background on this plant. This is a plant, and actually I can tell you exactly which one it is because it's still in the nursery pot. So I can tell you that it is an Anthurium champion Livium orange. If you've got that exact one, congratulations. This is very highly specialized to you. But even if you don't, this is kind of what most people would imagine kind of flowering Anthurium to be. You are predominantly buying this plant for the blooms and not necessarily the leaves. The leaves are okay, they're a bit on the turgid side, they're a bit stiff, but they're not what you buy this plant for. They're not that exciting. The blooms is what you would be buying these types of plants for. And I got this one for, actually, let's talk about that in availability. I'm getting ahead of myself. So background on this is I was in my local garden center. I didn't actually get this from a big box store or even a supermarket, although you will find different forms of these types of Anthuriums within those stores. This is one that, as I said, I found in my local garden center, and it's been a very long time since I've grown this type of Anthurium. I have a whole host of different types of foliage Anthuriums, but these kind of more, I'm buying it so I can let you bloom, and I want you to bloom as often as possible because that's the exciting thing. I haven't had in a very, very long time. My mother back in Greece has been growing some of these on her balcony, and she's been struggling to kind of get them to bloom. And I've been trying something for the last kind of almost year, I think, that I've had this plant, and it has worked a charm. Even more impressively, it has worked a charm now in the winter, or kind of end of autumn, beginning of winter, where the light levels are down, the heat is kind of a lot colder generally, even though it's in the house. This is growing in my regular household conditions. So anybody that's new to the channel that is looking at me going, you're probably growing in something that looks like a greenhouse. It's not a greenhouse, it's a conservatory, but your thinking is right. It gets a lot of decent light in here, decent humidity, but this is not a plant that grows in here. I grow it in a regular room in my house like you might be. So yeah, I think that's kind of how this plant came to be in my care, so to speak. So moving on to a speed of growth on this one, and it's an interesting one. And I'll benchmark this the same way that I would benchmark most of my other reviews, where if I'm comparing this to a golden pothos, and a golden pothos growing in the growing season, so spring and summer. Again, I will keep it fair, and I will compare it to the golden pothos growing in regular household humidity, not the golden pothos that I have in here, because that's an unfair advantage for the ones that are growing in here. So if my golden pothos in my house is growing maybe 2 leaves on each of its growing stem in the kind of growing season, then this plant will give me about a leaf or 2 a month in its growing season, and it will give me a bloom, 1 new bloom every month, and it will have multiple blooms. And before anybody asks, there are 2 growing points in here. And for the uninitiated in the lingo that I'm talking about now, there are 2 kind of plants in the same pot, essentially. It's all there is. There's 2 kind of main points that are coming out of the soil. So that could tell you something, but to be fair, both of these plants are bringing out blooms. There's 1 bloom, 2 blooms. That's 2 blooms on one and 3 on the other, but at any one given point in time, there's always blooms on both of these plants within this one pot. But in terms of foliage, which again, I'm going to say this a lot in this video, you're not really buying this for the foliage. Foliage is pretty. I mean, I quite like it. I enjoy it. You're looking at maybe a new leaf or 2 again in the growing season. Now, when we're looking at this in the kind of off season or the kind of autumn and winter, bring that down to about half speed. So if you're getting 2 leaves in the spring and summer a month, you might get 1 leaf every month or 1 leaf every month and a half in that kind of cooler, darker time of the year. In terms of blooms, you might get a bloom every kind of month and a half, maybe 2 months, but it still manages to retain quite a few of its blooms. Just to give you a bit of an indication, this bloom, this bloom, this bloom, and believe it or not, that is a bloom, and this is how it goes before it kind of gets rid of the bloom, or basically, or the bloom dies off. It starts off as a much brighter color there, and then it will eventually die down to this. I'll talk about the ones that have got some crispiness later on in the review. But those blooms, so if this happens within the month, you will still have loads of other flowers, is what I'm trying to say here, or inflorescences is the right word, so blooms on this plant at any one given time, even in the autumn and winter. Now, what you might get is more of them die off than come in, if that makes sense. So in the summer, at the height of this, this had, I want to say 12 or 14 blooms on it. It was insane. So I'm now down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 blooms. It's not too bad. It's still got quite a few blooms on there. So, and again, I think a lot of it has to do with a tip that I'll give you towards the end of the video when I talk about accessories and care. At least that's been my experience. Now, easy propagation with this, if you wanted to propagate an Anthurium, and specifically these types of Anthuriums, you could go in and take a cutting from where the nodes are. So essentially the node is that growing stem, and it's where it's got the leaves coming off and branching for it. It's usually got a bit of a bump. You might even get a tiny bit of a root, like an aerial root showing up on it already, and you would cut there. Some of the nodes have already got branching that is happening within them, so you'll get a new branch happening there. On these types of Anthuriums, you could, if there's enough of a branch there, you could chop off that branch, that branching element there, and remove that out as long as there's a node. And then what I found works for these, if you have got it, it would be better if you can put it in some damp sphagnum moss. If you're kind of like really into your plants, you probably already have that. If you are not, and you are just starting and you don't have any of that, and you're just like, what is sphagnum moss? I hear you. You could try letting it dry out, the cutting, and then getting some very light soil, even if you've just got a regular houseplant soil mix that you can get from a store. And after you've let it dry out for a bit and it's not wet when you've taken the cutting, you could put it in some very fluffy soil. I'm talking about soil with perlite. You could try also growing that in a kind of small cup of water, but water propagation can be a bit hit and miss when it comes to anthuriums. Not impossible, but the soil will be a better option there. And what I would say with soil is probably let it kind of almost dry out as much as you possibly can and then water it. Don't let it go bone dry if it still hasn't rooted in, or if it's got very small roots, you could kind of hamper it a bit. Treat it like you would any other plant that's trying to root out. So kind of be gentle on the watering to begin with, because there's nothing there to suck up the water to begin with. And as there's more roots that are coming in, start leveling it out. And you should be completely fine with this plant. These are some of the most common anthuriums. They might not be the easiest for everybody, and it might be just because people don't necessarily know how to treat them, because these are slightly different from a lot of the other common houseplants, but they are very common. You get them all the time. Even if something goes wrong, you could replace it, but also the point I'm trying to make, because they are so common, they should propagate relatively easily and relatively more straightforward as well. Now let's come into availability for this plant. And I kind of touched on this earlier. You can get this in supermarkets, you can get this in box stores, you can get this in a garden center like I've talked about before. You can usually get these in plant stores. There are a lot of places that you should be able to get the more traditional type of Flamingo Anthurium. I think that's kind of technically what you would call these, is like Flamingo type Anthuriums. I think the correct word for it, if I'm not mistaken, is Anthurium Andraeanum, but I might be wrong. I will see it and correct it on the video at editing. But you can get this in most places. And as I said, it's not just where I live, which is in the UK. I know my parents, when they lived in Cyprus, they could get this. I mean, they still live in Cyprus now, partially. They can get it there, they can get it in Greece, you can get it all over Europe. I'm seeing a lot of the American content creators, they've also got this as well. This isn't necessarily going to be a plant that's going to be difficult to find. A lot of people might get this for you potentially as a gift when they come to visit your house, and it's just like, I got you a little pretty plant and look, it's got blooms on it. And they will come in different shades and colors. I liked this one. I don't know whether or not any of these are going to show it too much. Maybe the newest leaf there we go. Even though it is struggling the mostest. You might see there a bit of why I originally bought this plant. You can see some pinky colors in there. You might see it on this kind of older bloom there. You might see some veination that is happening on that leaf, that is a slightly lighter kind of yellowy white color. That is part of the reason why I bought this plant. But you can get these types of anthuriums in loads of different colors. This one was slightly more expensive, and I'll tell you now how much I paid for it. In a pot about this size, it annoyingly does not say the size of the pot on here, I paid £19.99, so 20 Great British pounds. Not the cheapest form of this plant that you could get. There are much cheaper forms. There are also much more expensive forms as well. It is to do with what the bloom looks like, and usually the coloring or any kind of potential patterning, because sometimes you get, or maybe the actual bloom itself, which this is the bloom, by the way, just to clarify, and not the bract, if I'm not mistaken. Is it the bract or the caterpillar? I think it's the bract. I might be wrong. I'll correct myself as to what this modified type of leaf is on the screen, just because it's good for you to know the botanical name for it. Now, the other big thing that I would say about this is it's not necessarily a rare plant. However, especially if you're just starting off, this isn't the most beginner-friendly plant you could get. And I will correct myself as I am saying that. It is a beginner plant in the form that if all you care about, if you really love the foliage, this can probably do okay for you. It's not the fustiest of anthuriums. Now, I know a lot of my usual audience might be sniggering in the back thinking, it's an anthurium, it's not easy. Yes, But these types of anthuriums tend to be easier than the types of anthuriums that we might all be growing, the rare or the uncommon anthuriums. The ones that a lot of us who tend to grow like weird plants tend to like, they tend to be some of the harder house plants to deal with and keep happy. This is still an anthurium, so it still has some of that, but it is common for a reason. It's common because people want it for the blooms and the coloration of the blooms. I get that, but also because out of a lot of the anthuriums, these don't tend to be the fussiest ones to grow. And you kind of see what I mean now. It's not a beginner plant, like it's not going to be as easy as a golden pothos, but don't let that put you off. It could be easy enough, and the blooms might take a beat, or you might need to kind of keep it specifically happy in order to get them back. And I'll give you my tips, as I said, at the end of the video, but you'll still have a beautiful foliage plant nonetheless. I have seen people who do all the wrong things with all of their houseplants, growing these types of anthuriums happily. Do they have a bloom on them? Absolutely not. Do they still have all of their leaves and getting new leaves all the time? Yes. So that's what I'm saying. It's a easy enough houseplant if all you care about is the foliage. If you want the blooms, there's a few things that if you do them, they should, at least they have helped me, but they should help you promote more blooming on your anthurium. Now in terms of pests with this one, and it's an interesting one because I'll talk to the two likely different audiences that are going to be looking at this video. I'll talk to kind of my usual audience who's very used to dealing with pests first, and then I'll talk to everybody else who maybe isn't used to houseplant pests. So by and large, this plant generally versus other anthuriums, not that bad in terms of like what it will get. Have I ever had thrips on this? I don't think I have, which is interesting for an anthurium. I've never had mealybugs, and I've never had, I'm trying to see if I've actually ever had thrips on this. And I don't think I've ever had mealybugs or spider mites, maybe spider mites once, bizarrely enough, on this plant, but again, it's not in my usual kind of high humidity conditions in here. It's in the household, so it's more likely to get that because the air will be drier. Now, for everybody else who's not used to talking about pests, and you've probably just heard me ramble through all that and just kind of, what is all of that? Don't worry, do not panic. You don't have to worry about that right now. Let's learn how to keep this one happy, basically. And I mean that with all the love in the world as well, by the way, just to clarify. So the thing you want to be doing when it comes to pests with this one is every time you water, have a look at the plant. And I know it sounds silly because you're looking at the plant anyway, but look at it properly. Look at the leaves, look at the top of the leaves, look at the back of the leaves, look at the blooms as well. Now, I will say something, especially if you're not used to kind of growing anthuriums, what will happen is this bloom here has got two different stages. It will have the female stage first, and you might get this bloom here, and it will have kind of almost like it will be wet. And then that will only last for a few days. And then you will get the male stage of the bloom, which is roughly what's happening here. And I'm really hoping some of that's going to come on screen. There is some spider webbing, but that is regular spiders rather than spider mites for the people in the know. You will get some kind of powderiness on that. So sometimes you might get it dropping on here. Do not worry about that specific powder. That is just the pollen from the male stage of the bloom. When it transitions from being the female stage to the male stage, you'll get that kind of pollen, essentially that dust dropping down on the leaf. That's fine. Don't worry about that. However, if you start seeing dustiness that's happening, especially if you can look at it very closely and you can see little things moving, you've got spider mites. If you've got anything on the leaves that looks like white cotton wool, that's something called mealybugs, and I'll tell you how to deal with all of these things. And if you're getting things like, you can almost see the leaf has got like a map, so things are burrowing and creating these kind of paths within the leaves, that is called thrips. Let's start with most of these. If you get them and you don't want to be spending a whole bunch of money and you don't want to be using pesticides or anything like that, the easiest thing you can do is the next time you water this, take it under the shower, bring it the shower head, and make sure that you're showering all of the leaves backwards, forwards, the blooms, everything like that. And I say when you're planning on watering it, because if you've just watered the plant and you try to do that, you're invariably rewatering the plant and it can lead to a whole host of different issues. So what I would say with that is shower it down. If you want to get a bit extra and you've got things like the mealybugs, the one I was talking about, the little cotton wool things, get something like rubbing alcohol. So I think it's 70 or 60%, I'll correct myself on the screen, and lower basically. And just use a little Q-tip and kind of brush away those bugs. It will basically melt them away. That is the most surefire way of getting them. But again, a good shower will get rid of most of these pests. What I want you to then do is, if you have noticed that and you've done all of this, you've not just done it once and left it. It doesn't end that easily, sadly. You need to be checking that every kind of 2 weeks for at least like a month and a half to make sure that that hasn't come back. If it has, do the shower thing again when it's time to water. And it should help. You could go into pesticides and things like that, but I'm assuming if this is one of the few or only plants that you've got in your collection or house, you don't have collections, you probably just have them as decorations in the house, which is completely fine. That is something that you probably maybe don't want to invest in. If at some point you get really like enamored by plants and this is your gateway drug, welcome, there's a lot of us here, then you can start looking at doing other things to deal with the pests. But to begin with, that is the simplest way of kind of handling those types of pests. Now, coming into accessories and care, and I'll give you a bit more about how you care for these plants and also what I've done to kind of keep them happy. So I did not repot this. I left this in the soil that it came with, soil being the optimum word there, and I've just watered it as it's been in the pot. Generally speaking, if you're just starting off or if you're only going to have this one plant, you don't really want to be repotting it for any reason. You will have to repot it if you keep it happy and it doubles in size and things like that, like every year or two around spring and summer, just to make sure that it's got enough space to grow in the pot. Otherwise, the roots will just strangle itself. Basically, it's just a very small space. So if it gets big at the top, it will get big at the bottom in terms of more roots. So you'll need to give it more space. The shoes will get a bit tight at that point. That's the easiest kind of analogy I can give you. The reason why I've left it in its own soil media is because Anthuriums, by and large, not all the time, and people will do things differently if they've been dealing with Anthuriums for a while, they don't like their roots being mucked around too much, especially if you don't know what you're doing. The roots can be quite thick, especially on this plant, but they can also snap quite easily as well, and that can really like push back the growth of this plant. So to begin with, the best thing you can do is just leave it in the soil mix. Now, I will say I was very fortunate, and possibly one of the reasons why this was slightly more expensive than the average ones that you might get in like the supermarket or the box stores, is that instead of traditional soil, it's using something called, there is some cocoa coir being kind of shredded up like coconut husks, but it's also got cocoa chunks. So instead of it being shredded entirely so it looks like soil, it's a bit more chunky, and that's why I've left it like this. Anthuriums, by and large, they like a couple of things. They like as much kind of air going to their roots, so they like a chunky soil, and they also want to remain evenly moist. Apologies for the word, but also it's annoying because it's just that, how do you do that without overwatering it? It's fine. This plant, I generally will just let it go dry and then water it when it goes dry. The one thing I will say about Anthuriums, they don't like to remain dry. Even this one, which is the most forgiving of Anthuriums, for far too long. So if this dries for you in 4 days, water it at 4 days. Don't let it sit there for another 8 days, 10 days, 12 days in bone dry soil. Then you will start seeing issues. That might also be contributing to the fact that you're not seeing blooms. Now, the other thing that's highly important when it comes to blooms, especially with these types of Anthuriums, and this is where my usual audience will be like, oh, we don't usually do that with our Anthuriums. Yes, because we're not trying to necessarily get blooms, we're trying to get more foliage most of the time. You need to put this in bright indirect light. That means a south or east facing window. I don't think west or north would necessarily be good now. And something with maybe a sheer curtain or something like that, or something that's pulled back a bit further back. So it needs to get light, but don't fry it. This is not a cactus. Do not fry this. So that's the thing that you need to remember, because it needs the higher light levels, as high as you can give it without frying again, within that broad indirect, like bright indirect light kind of territory that I was talking about there, is what is going to promote its blooms. If you think about it, if it's getting all the light that it needs, it's just like, oh yes, this is ideal conditions. I will procreate, which is essentially what the blooms are. But if it's getting less than ideal conditions and the soil stays dry for too long, or it's not getting enough light, it will still survive. This is one of the Anthuriums that will still survive. It will look a bit busted, but it won't ever do the blooms that you want it to do because it's not in its ideal conditions. So sort all of that out first, because that's easily enough to kind of handle and adjust around your household. My biggest trick for this plant in terms of getting it to bloom all the time, this might be the one thing that I will say buy. Told you not to buy anything else in this video, but this is the one thing that if you really wanted to get this to bloom more frequently, this is the one thing that I will say buy. And you can have it for a long period of time, but they don't tend to expire that quickly. Get an orchid specific fertilizer, but specifically the fertilizers for orchids to bloom, because you can get kind of like a more generic orchid fertilizer, you can get orchid fertilizers to get more foliage, or you can get orchid fertilizers that are specifically to promote blooms. And you're looking at me going, this is not an orchid. True, but it does need something that is within, it's one of the chemical elements that is within the fertilizer, and I'll put it up the top there so you can see what it's called as well. That's what it needs in order to bloom more frequently, which is why it exists in the fertilizer for orchids to begin with. So what you're going to do with that is have a look at what the instructions say on the bottle. Whatever that says, halve it or quarter it. So if it needs 1 teaspoon to 1 liter of water, do half a teaspoon or a quarter teaspoon to a liter of water. And then what you're going to do is use that in the water solution every single time that you water it, even in the winter, which is why I am getting blooms even in the winter. Still getting the good, decent light that it needs. Would this appreciate slightly higher levels of humidity? Yes. But don't worry about that too much. Out of a lot of the Anthuriums, this one, in my experience at least, tends to be the most forgiving when it comes to lower humidity levels. Granted, if you live in the desert and your internal humidity in the house is exceptionally low and you struggle with most plants to grow them, most tropical plants to grow them, because the humidity is so low and you can maybe only grow cactuses in your house, this is still going to be one that's going to be a challenge for you. But if you can grow other types of houseplants okay, this will do okay. Maybe don't put this directly above a radiator, which will make the air around it even drier. But other than that, you don't have to fuss this. You don't have to worry about the humidity being too high. And I know a lot more people, more average people that are not hugely into plants like we all do, they've heard enough about humidity to go, oh my God, do I need to do humidity? And I don't really want to invest in a humidifier for just a plant and all these things. You don't have to with this one. Do not stress. That's not going to be the big thing. The big thing is good light level, making sure that you're on top of its watering, and that fertilizer that I was talking about before as well. The other important thing before I move away from watering is do not overwater these plants. They will, remember what we said before? It needs air in its roots, but it also needs to be evenly moist. What does that mean? It means don't let it dry out for too much, but at the same time is don't let it be sapping wet for a long period of time. This is not a bog plant. It doesn't need to be sapping wet all the time, so you do need to let it dry. If it's still wet, and you know, if you take one thing away from this video is do not water your plant on a schedule if you can. Use your schedule if you're saying, I'm going to water this every Sunday, for instance, once a week, every Sunday. What I want you to do on that Sunday is instead of just mechanically going and putting this and watering it, regardless of whatever is happening to the plant, that will cause you issues, root rot and all these things, which basically just means it's rotting because you've left it for too long and too waterbogged. Before any of my usual audience pipes up with a whole bunch of like confusing terms, I am trying to talk to people that also don't have any knowledge of houseplants. Anybody who wants to contribute, because I know you are all lovely individuals, please do so down below in the comments. But with this, you just need to make sure that you're not keeping it boggy. Just make sure that you're letting it at the Sunday watering. Just feel it, see if it's still heavy, maybe stick your finger in it, see if it's wet. Let it be for another few days and then check again. Use that in terms of your schedule to check rather than water, rather than just going, oh, 7 days, I'm going to water this regardless. It's Sunday, of course it needs this water. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Just because, I'll paint this in a picture in terms of human terms so you might be able to understand. Just because you're used to having dinner every day at 6 p.m., at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or later if you're Mediterranean, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to eat every night at the same time, because it might be that you've had a late snack at some point and you're not hungry at that time and you need to eat later, or you haven't eaten a decent lunch and you need to eat earlier. Same thing, same. But yes, let's come into some of my final thoughts and kind of scores on this one. So, knowing what I know now, if I didn't own this plant and it came across me, would I purchase it? Yes, I would. And I'm actually kind of annoyed with myself for not purchasing this type of Anthurium sooner when I'm growing all of these other different types of Anthuriums. This has been surprisingly easy to grow. And I will hasten to say, for those that are starting off, part of that, I think, might be because I have grown much fussier Anthuriums. Much fussier Anthuriums. And if you've been growing them for long enough, the slightly easier Anthurium seems like a walk in the park. It does not take away that if you're first starting off and you may be struggling with this, there is no shame in that. As I said, what I was talking about before, it's an easy plant, but also at the same time, slightly challenging if you want to have it in pristine condition, yeah? Now, in terms of a score of, say, 0 or 1 being the worst and 10 being the best, and I'll give you 2 scores. Actually, no, I'll give you the 1 score. I'll give you the 1 score as an overall. This would be a solid 8 for me. Believe it or not, this would be a solid 8. I have massively enjoyed the blooms. I am loving the fact that I've been able to kind of get to a point now where I've tried growing this years before I had a huge collection, and I may have struggled to get it to bloom and all these things. I am so happy that this is blooming all the time. Yes, some of the crispy leaves, and I mentioned that I was going to talk about this, is when I went away a couple of months ago now, and this maybe didn't get watered as often as I would have liked it because I couldn't ask the person who was caring for all of my plants to go above and beyond, so this maybe dried out for 2 or 3 days longer than it should have done. That's fine. That's on me, but it's fine. I've left the blooms on there. I could have removed them, but at that point I had loads. I might do now because there's not that many of them. I'll decide. But yeah, this is a solid 8 out of 10 for me. Solid 8 out of 10. I've enjoyed growing it. The coloration of the blooms is great. It kind of feels like a bit of an achievement, even if it's a small achievement considering all the other plants that I've got, that I've been able to get this happy and blooming and just overall okay with itself. So I've taken it upon myself now to kind of help people like my mum who might be struggling to get this to bloom and say, you need to use an orchid fertilizer. She's in Greece and she doesn't know where she can get this. So if any of my Greek followers know where you can get orchid bloom fertilizer in Greece and what brand, maybe do let me know down below. Otherwise, I'm going to see if I can take her some back from here when I next visit, because a bottle of that will probably last her a year or 2. It's fine. But yes, what did you think? I know this is unusual for my usual audience. Hopefully this will reach other people that are wider out rather than just my usual audience. Also, if anybody from my usual audience wants to share this video with any of their friends that are maybe just starting off and they've got this plant, please do so. And generally speaking, sharing any of the videos on the channel helps immensely to kind of just talk to newer audiences that maybe have never seen. And yeah, and thank you from myself every time that you do that. It does mean the world to me. But yes, I think I should let you be, as I said, share your experiences if you've had any with these plants, both good and bad. As always with these reviews, I want to know full transparent truth down below. And yeah, I shall let you enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.